Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, class. I hope you guys are all doing well, whatever time of day it is as you're watching this. This is the lecture which corresponds with the World War II PowerPoint, which I posted in the Google Classroom. We're going to go through basically slides 1 through 6. I mean, 1 just being the title slide, World War I. So class, or excuse me, World War II. It would be World War II, excuse me, kids. It would be World War II, which would get the United States out of the Great Depression because, it led to job creation, economic stimulation. You had soldiers abroad fighting. But what we're going to go over today is we're going to go how, the war begins in Europe, Africa, and Asia. We're going to look at what leads to U.S. involvement, and prior to that, how the United States started to brace itself for a war. Then we're going to talk about how the World War II impacted things at home, domestically in the United States, and lastly, the conclusion of the war. So we're going to basically go slides 2 through 6. So looking at slide 2, understand that World War II begins in Asia, Africa, and Europe. It would be Japan would bring the war to China and create war in Asia. The Italians would bring the war to North Africa under Benito Mussolini. And then, you had Adolf Hitler who would bring the war to Europe with the Nazi Party. All right, so once again, whereas the United States, we are on the other side of the world. World War II is nowhere near us. All right, so we're in a good place, very similar to World War I, right? World War I begins in Europe, the United States is on the other side of the globe. So, it really gets the American economy going because when we shift here, now let's look at slide 3. When you look at slide 3, what the United States would do is the United States would start preparing for war. And first, the United States goes from like a strict neutrality that becomes more loose as time goes on. So 1935 and 1937 Neutrality Acts, which are highlighted on slide 3 here, it was declared illegal for the United States to sell weapons to countries that are at war. If you remember, when we covered World War I, this was one of the problems that got us involved in World War I. We were selling supplies, and Germany didn't like that, right? Remember, prior to World War I, they started attacking our ships, sinking Lusitania, the unrestricted submarine warfare. So we're trying to learn from mistakes, and we're trying to avoid that. And that's really what the Neutrality Acts in 1935 and 1937 are looking to do. But then in 1939, American companies were allowed to sell weapons on a cash and carry basis to our allies. So we'll sell you the weapons, but we want the money up front, cash, right? No IOUs. This is no, we'll pay you back later. We want the money up front because the Depression's ending. We want to get the American economy kick-started. And carry, you have to ship them. We are not going to send you weapons. We're not going to deliver those weapons for you because if you remember, it was that was the problem which got us sucked into World War I, the carrying, the delivery of those weapons. Then in 1941, we get into the Lend-Lease Act. So remember, 1935, 1937, it's illegal to sell to countries that are at war. 1941 under the Lend-Lease Act, yeah, we'll let you borrow weapons. Here you go, take them. Either give them back at the conclusion of the war or pay us what they're worth, right? So our neutrality goes from really strict and tight to we're lending Great Britain weapons come the 1940s. So the United States knows it's really only a matter of time before we get involved in the war. We're an economic power, we're a world power, we're sitting the other side of the globe, we're lending the Allies weapons. We don't want to see Western Europe fall, right? We're lending weapons, and we know an attack is coming. And we know it's going to be the Japanese. We cut them off from oil supply, so we know it's a matter of time before Japan attacks us. We don't know when, we don't know where. And then December 7th, 1941, what does Japan do? They bomb Pearl Harbor, right? A day that will forever live in infamy. We then declare war on them, and as a result, we're ultimately at war with the Germans and we're at war with the Italians because, they make up the Axis powers during World War II. During World War II in this class, we are not going to get into the conflicts as much. It's essentially American strategy. We end the powers, we take out the Italians first, then the Germans, and then we save the Japanese for the end, which we'll get to in a second. But we're going to take a look at slide 5 now and talk about World War II at home. So a couple things we're going to talk about: war bonds. The government would sell war bonds to raise money. That's you buy a bond, and the government's going to give you your money back plus interest later down the road. So that's how they raise revenue for the war. Women and African Americans really get to enter the workforce and they get to contribute to the American economy and the war effort. Once again, so these are like quote unquote minority groups in the workforce, which they get to play an increased role. The Japanese in internment, the Japanese basically get put in internment camps. Well, what did they do? They might be spies. I'm gonna put up the YouTube video of internment, which is government propaganda, basically say, hey, we had to do this to these people. They might be spies. Well, if you think about that, you get due process in this country, and it wasn't like they were Japanese. 2/3 of them were U.S. citizens. They happen to have Japanese ancestry. So when we look at that, was that national security? Was that racism? There's all different ways which one could look at that, and we will, analyze that as we, move through this week. Ultimately, what would happen is the Supreme Court in Korematsu versus the United States in 1944, they declared that internment was constitutional. They said it was okay. Hi, Jonah. My son's back there waving. The Supreme Court said it was okay. They said it was okay to classify a race as a national security threat. This, another incredibly racist ruling handed down by the Supreme Court in American history. And the government tried to make good on this during the late 20th century, when they would pay survivors of internment reparations. Let's move on to the next aspect of World War II that I like to cover, and that's the use of the atomic bomb. Like I said, the Italians and the Germans get taken out first. During World War II, the Manhattan Project is used. The Manhattan Project was the secret code name used to develop the atomic bomb in this country. We would drop 2 atomic bombs on Japan to conclude the war. The justification for it was they were warned. The Japanese government, Emperor Tojo, was warned, basically told, you need to surrender or you're going to suffer dire consequences. We dropped leaflets on the people and basically said, you need to leave your cities, you need to get your government to surrender or you're going to suffer dire consequences. We then, Japan does not surrender, we drop the first bomb on Hiroshima. They still don't surrender. A few days later, we drop another bomb on Nagasaki, and they ultimately surrender. The reason for this was it shortened the war and it saved American lives. If we would have continued to fight a ground war, a Call of Duty type warfare, the war could have raged, for who knows how long, and more Americans would die. The justification is we need to shorten the war, we need to save American lives. It's the most horrific attack in the history of warfare. You're talking about tens of thousands of people died instantly. I will also post a YouTube video, where you'll get to hear from someone who was there talking about what he witnessed. You're basically talking about, people's, skin and flesh just melting off their body. It was a horrific attack. And fortunately, there has been no atomic weaponry used since 1944. So that's what I got for you on World War II. I hope you guys are all doing well. Sorry to end on such a somber note. We used the atomic bomb, but that's how the war ended. If you have any questions, email me.